It is 6 a.m., and the alarm does not just wake you up, it interrupts something. A silence your body was using. A deep metabolic stillness that began hours ago, long before you opened your eyes, long before you were conscious of anything at all. Your stomach feels hollow in a way that is not quite pain and not quite comfort. Something in between, like the feeling of an empty room that still carries the faint warmth of whoever was last in it. You slept through dinner, or you deliberately skipped breakfast, and now you are standing at the edge of a decision that every person who has ever tried to improve their mornings has faced. Lace up and train now, or eat first and train later. And here is the thing that stops most people cold in that moment. They do not actually know what is happening inside their body right now. They have heard the competing claims so many times that the noise has become background static. Someone at their gym swears fasted training melts fat and sharpens the mind in ways nothing else can replicate. Someone on the internet warns that training without food destroys muscle, tanks hormones, and leaves you worse off than if you had never trained at all. A registered dietitian says to eat a banana before any exercise. A fitness influencer says to fast for 18 hours and then sprint. The advice is loud, passionate, often confident, and almost never accompanied by an honest explanation of the underlying biology.
So let us start there. Because once you understand what is actually happening inside your body during a fasted workout, the debate does not just resolve, it changes shape entirely. It stops being a question about good or bad and becomes something far more precise and far more useful. What is my body doing right now in this specific fasted state, at this specific intensity, and how do I work with that biology instead of fighting against it? That question has a real answer, and it begins the moment you finished your last meal the night before. When you closed the kitchen, a cascade of events began that you were not conscious of at all. Carbohydrates from that meal were broken down into glucose and absorbed into your bloodstream. Insulin rose in response. This hormone is often painted as a metabolic villain in fitness culture, but in these post-meal hours, it is doing exactly what it was designed to do, acting as a molecular key that unlocks your cells so they can pull in glucose, amino acids, and fats from the bloodstream. Your liver accepted a generous share of that glucose and began converting it into glycogen, a form of stored energy that looks like long, tightly branching chains of sugar molecules, compact and dense and ready to be broken apart when needed. Your muscles did the same, loading their own private glycogen reserves that only they can access and spend. Fat cells, receiving the message that insulin was high and energy was abundant, were told to store rather than release. The entire metabolic mood was abundance. Use what just came in, store the rest, build, grow, accumulate.
Then the hours passed, quietly, without drama. You were not eating, but your brain never stopped needing fuel. Neurons fire continuously. Your heart beats without pause. Your immune system, your liver, your kidneys, your diaphragm, none of these take a break just because you are asleep. All of it requires a continuous trickle of glucose, and with no food coming in, that supply has to come from somewhere internal. Your liver is the hero of the overnight hours. Quietly, efficiently, without any signal from you at all, it begins breaking down its glycogen stores and releasing glucose into the bloodstream in a slow, carefully regulated drip. This process is called hepatic glucose output, and it is the reason you can sleep for 8 or 9 hours without your blood sugar crashing and waking you in a cold sweat. Your liver is keeping the lights on while you rest. As the hours accumulate, insulin continues to fall. Fat cells, sensing the gradual shift in the hormonal environment, begin to loosen their grip on stored energy. the biochemical lock on their contents relaxes. Small amounts of fatty acids begin to trickle into the bloodstream, supplementing the liver's glucose release. And something else happens that almost nobody talks about in fitness content. Adrenaline and norepinephrine begin to rise. Not dramatically, not in a way that feels like anxiety or panic. At modest overnight and early morning levels, these hormones are not stress responses, they are alerting signals. They are your nervous system waking up and orienting itself before your alarm even goes off. By the time 10, 12, or 14 hours have passed since your last meal, your body has genuinely shifted to a different operating mode. Liver glycogen has been meaningfully depleted.
Insulin is at its lowest point of the day. Fat cells are primed and responsive. Your adrenaline has nudged your heart rate up slightly and sharpened your background attention. You feel, if you pay attention, slightly more awake than you expected to on an empty stomach. That is not a coincidence. That is biology that has not changed in tens of thousands of years. Your ancestors did not wake up to a full refrigerator. They woke into scarcity and had to move, search, hunt, gather, and perform before any food arrived. The hormonal patterns your body runs on an empty morning are the same patterns that made that possible. Fasted training is less a modern performance technique than it is a return to an older rhythm your cells still remember and still respond to. But before a single step is taken, one distinction matters enormously, and fitness culture consistently fails to make it. Training in a true fasted state is not the same as training after simply skipping your last snack. If you ate a full meal 2 or 3 hours ago, your insulin is still elevated. Your digestive system is still actively processing nutrients. Your bloodstream is still circulating glucose and amino acids from that meal. Technically, you are not currently chewing, but you are metabolically fed. The liver is not in hepatic glucose output mode. Your fat cells are still mostly locked. The hormonal environment is completely different from what exists after a genuine fast. What changes at 10, 12, 16 hours is the full metabolic commitment. Your body has acknowledged that no new fuel is arriving and has reorganized its entire fuel management strategy around that fact. Glycogen is being actively managed. Fat mobilization is underway.
Ketone production, the liver's process of converting fatty acids into an alternative brain fuel, may have begun in small amounts depending on the length of the fast. That is a fundamentally different internal environment, and training into it produces fundamentally different internal responses than training 2 hours after a meal does. Think of your body during a genuine fasted workout as an orchestra performing without fresh sheet music. It is working from memory, from deeply practiced patterns, from internally stored resources it has been carefully managing all night. Every section of the orchestra has a role, and every role changes when food is absent. Your liver is the conductor, deciding in real time how much stored glucose to release, when to lean on fat, how to keep every other system supplied without letting any single section run out. Your muscles are the percussion section, the most energy-hungry part of the performance, demanding the most from the fuel supply chain and driving the tempo forward. Your fat cells are the deep storage vault at the back of the building, enormous reserves of dense, long-duration energy that only open their doors when insulin is low and adrenaline gives the signal. Your brain is the most demanding audience member in the front row, requiring a constant, protected, stable supply of glucose above everything else, and carrying the implicit threat to shut down the entire performance if that supply is compromised. Your hormones are the score itself, written in a language of chemical signals that rewrites in real time based on how long you have fasted, how hard you are pushing, and how much practice your body has had navigating this particular metabolic piece.
When you begin to move on an empty stomach, the conductor flips to a different score. Not a simpler one, a more sophisticated one, written for a leaner, more resourceful version of the same orchestra. Adrenaline tells fat cells to open. Growth hormone begins its quiet, protective work on lean tissue. Cortisol provides a steady background signal that supports glucose production from the liver and maintains blood pressure stability under physical stress. Your muscles reach into their local glycogen stores for the fastest available fuel, while simultaneously becoming more permeable to fatty acids arriving from circulation. Everything is coordinated, layered, interdependent. It is a performance your body has been capable of since long before sports science existed to name it. In the very first minutes of movement, your muscles draw on local glycogen stored inside the muscle fibers themselves from previous days of eating. This fuel is close, immediately accessible, and does not need to be transported from elsewhere. At low to moderate intensities, this initial draw is measured and conservative. Your body is not in a panic. It is calculating, distributing, managing resources across multiple demands simultaneously. And alongside that glycogen draw, adrenaline and norepinephrine, already slightly elevated from the overnight fast, rise further with physical exertion and begin pushing their signal to fat cells. Break down stored triglycerides, release the components, get fatty acids into the bloodstream. Even within the first 5 to 10 minutes of a fasted session at a manageable intensity, fat is contributing more to the fuel mix than it would if you had eaten 30 minutes before this workout. The difference is not dramatic in these early minutes.
One of the most reliably surprising experiences people have during the first portion of a fasted workout is that nothing feels wrong. The anticipated weakness does not materialize. The expected mental fog does not arrive. The hunger, which may have been clearly present while tying shoes or setting up equipment, fades into a distant background hum as soon as movement begins. The nervous system shifts from rest and digest mode into movement and perform mode, and in doing so, it suppresses the hunger signal and activates the alerting signals instead. Many people describe a kind of clean, purposeful sharpness in these early minutes. Breathing finds its rhythm faster than expected. Movements feel controlled and intentional. The usual mental chatter quiets. Focus narrows to the task in front of them. This experience is not placebo. It is the measurable result of low insulin paired with gently elevated catecholamines and a nervous system that has no digestive work competing for its resources. During small pauses, slowly and carefully, during sustained low to moderate intensity fasted cardio, stretched over 30 to 60 minutes, the metabolic picture deepens considerably. Fat oxidation climbs progressively throughout the session as the catecholamine signal to fat cells strengthens and glycogen is conserved more carefully. Multiple studies on trained individuals have found that fasted steady-state cardio increases fat burning by 20 to 30% compared to the same workout performed after a carbohydrate-heavy meal. This is not a rounding error. This is a meaningful, consistent, physiologically explained difference. The mechanism is straightforward. Insulin is suppressed throughout the session, keeping the biochemical gate to fat mobilization wide open. Growth hormone is elevated, both from the overnight fast and from the exercise stimulus itself, and it actively promotes fat breakdown while signaling the body to protect lean tissue from being used as fuel. The lactate threshold, the point where effort stops feeling manageable and starts feeling labored, often comes earlier in a fasted session than in a fed one, but the zone below that threshold feels smoother, more effortless, more metabolically efficient in ways that are difficult to describe but easy to experience. This is the window that people who practice fasted training consistently return to, not for the fat burned in any single session, though that is a real benefit, but for the feeling of a metabolism operating from its own reserves without the cognitive and hormonal noise of recent food. It is quiet, efficient, sustainable, and with repetition it becomes easier, not harder.
But there is a ceiling on that comfortable efficiency, and the type of training you choose is what determines whether you stay below it
or crash through it. The moment you shift from a sustainable moderate effort into true high-intensity interval training, the internal story changes completely and immediately. Explosive, fast-twitch muscle fibers, the ones recruited for sprints, heavy barbell work, plyometrics, and any all-out effort, cannot efficiently burn fat. They are biologically wired for glucose, and they need it instantly and in massive quantities. A full sprint, a maximal deadlift, an all-out 30-second interval demands more glucose in a few seconds than your liver can steadily release over several minutes. The result is a sudden, sharp increase in glucose demand from your muscles, layered on top of the liver's existing obligation to supply your brain. These two systems begin to compete for the same resource. The brain always wins this competition at a biological level. Your body will reduce muscular performance before it allows blood glucose to fall to levels that threaten neurological function. The result is what many people have experienced as an inexplicable performance wall during fasted high-intensity training, a sudden heaviness in the legs, a loss of the explosive sharpness, a feeling that the effort required for the next interval is somehow greater than the last one, despite no change in the protocol.
Cortisol surges in response to this glycogen stress. In the moment, it is doing something necessary, authorizing emergency glucose production from alternative sources, including the breakdown of amino acids from protein through a process called gluconeogenesis. In a single session in a body with adequate protein reserves, this does not meaningfully threaten muscle mass. The concern is repetition and context. Doing high-intensity fasted training daily, compounded by insufficient sleep, chronically elevated background stress, and consistently inadequate protein and calorie intake, transforms what is designed as an emergency protocol into a chronic operating mode. Cortisol that should return to baseline after a session stays elevated, recovery slows, adaptation plateaus. The session that was supposed to build resilience begins to quietly generate fatigue instead. This is not a condemnation of high-intensity fasted training. It is a context statement. Done occasionally, at appropriate intervals, with solid overall nutrition and recovery, high-intensity fasted work can generate meaningful adaptation. Done too frequently, by someone whose total recovery capacity is already compromised, it becomes a drain instead of a stimulus.
For resistance training in a fasted state, the picture is more nuanced than most people expect. Walk into the gym without having eaten, grip the bar, and something surprising happens. For the first several sets, you might not notice any meaningful difference at all. For compound movements at moderate to heavy loads, your primary energy systems are stored ATP, creatine phosphate, and muscle glycogen. These are all local, immediately accessible fuels that do not depend on a recent meal. If you ate adequate carbohydrates and total calories across the previous day or two, your muscle glycogen came into this morning session reasonably well stocked. A focused 45 to 60-minute fasted strength session built around compound movements like squats, presses, rows, and deadlifts can feel almost identical to a fed session in terms of raw strength output. Research on short-term fasting, up to around 24 hours, consistently shows minimal reduction in maximal force production for most healthy adults. The fear that skipping breakfast will immediately cost you muscle is not supported by the evidence.
What is different is the hormonal environment surrounding the session, and what that means for the recovery and growth process that follows. Insulin is suppressed throughout the workout, which means the usual insulin-assisted muscle protein synthesis signal will be blunted until you eat. Growth hormone is elevated, which protects lean tissue and enhances fat mobilization during the session. Cortisol rises with the stress of lifting, as it always does. The net effect is a state that researchers sometimes describe as catabolic lean. Your body is efficiently breaking down and mobilizing fuel during the session, but the rebuilding process is paused, waiting for the nutritional signal to begin. That signal arrives when you break your fast. This is why the post-workout meal during fasted strength training is not optional, not a nice addition, but a strategic necessity. A meal with substantial protein, somewhere between 25 and 50 grams depending on your size and training volume, plus enough carbohydrates to begin glycogen replenishment, transforms the post-session window from a metabolic limbo into a powerful anabolic environment. The muscle fibers that were stressed and microdamaged by the lifting now have the raw materials to repair and grow stronger. Skip this consistently and the adaptation stalls. Respect it and fasted lifting becomes a legitimate, effective tool.
The hormones driving all of this deserve a closer look, because understanding them as a system rather than as individual actors is what separates intelligent fasted training from reckless experimentation. Insulin is the master regulator. In a fasted state, it falls to its daily low, and this single fact opens metabolic doors that stay closed when insulin is elevated. Fat cells release stored fatty acids, the liver shifts towards glucose production rather than glucose storage, even the brain enters a slightly different operational mode, receiving energy through a more stable pathway than the insulin-driven spikes and valleys of a fed state. Insulin suppression is not inherently good or bad. It is a physiological condition that, when paired with appropriate exercise, creates a distinct and useful metabolic environment. Adrenaline and norepinephrine amplify everything. They were already slightly elevated before your workout from the overnight fast. Exercise pushes them further. In a fasted session, these catecholamines are simultaneously telling fat cells to release energy, telling the liver to produce glucose, telling the cardiovascular system to prepare for increased output, and telling the brain to stay alert and focused. They are the reason the first portion of a fasted workout often feels sharper and more energized than expected. They are also the reason that very hard fasted efforts can feel both powerfully capable and suddenly precarious if the glycogen supply runs out before they do.
Growth hormone operates on a different timescale. Both fasting and exercise can raise it several-fold, with the greatest elevations occurring during overnight fasting and during the early stages of a resistance training session. It does not build muscle during the workout itself, which is a common misunderstanding. What it does is protect lean tissue from being broken down as a fuel source, and it enhances fat mobilization so that fat is preferentially offered as the energy supply. When you eventually eat and provide adequate protein, the elevated growth hormone environment that has been sustained through the fasted session and the workout makes the rebuilding process more efficient. The muscle protein synthesis response to your post-workout meal is amplified by the growth hormone environment that preceded it. Cortisol is the strategist you cannot afford to demonize and cannot afford to ignore. In moderate amounts during a fasted workout, it is keeping you going, keeping blood sugar stable, and ensuring energy continues to flow even as easy sources are depleted. In excessive, chronic amounts, driven by workouts that are too long, too intense, too frequent in a fasted state, layered on top of poor sleep and high external stress, it becomes a net negative force. The distinction is in the total load, not in any single session. One hard fasted workout with adequate recovery is a useful stress. 10 of them in 2 weeks without recovery is a recipe for regression.
25 minutes into a moderately paced fasted session, something interesting happens in the internal experience. The early sharpness has settled into a steady, confident rhythm. Breathing is controlled. Movement feels practiced and automatic. Many people at this point feel not depleted, but genuinely good, in a way that feels different from a fed workout, in a way they find difficult to articulate precisely. Blood glucose is being maintained by the liver. Fat is flowing into the muscles at a rate they are burning efficiently. Hormones are balanced. This is the metabolic sweet spot that fasted training advocates describe, and it is real. It is physiologically documented, and it is available to most healthy people who approach it with patience and build toward it gradually. But as the session extends beyond 45 minutes, or as intensity increases beyond the moderate threshold, the experience begins to shift. Bar speed in a lifting session slows slightly. The pace in a cardio session that felt comfortable 10 minutes ago starts requiring noticeably more effort. Rest periods feel too short. The crisp mental focus that was present early in the session can begin to soften into mild irritability or a slight foggy quality as the brain senses that quick-access glucose is trending lower. These are not catastrophic signals. They are informational ones. They are your body communicating, clearly and honestly, that it is approaching the boundary of what it can sustain in the current fuel state. The appropriate response is not to push harder to prove something. The appropriate response is to respect the signal, adjust the session, and either slow down or end well.
There are clearer signals that should never be ignored. Sudden dizziness that does not resolve when you slow down. Nausea that comes on without warning. Tunnel vision. A profound, unusual weakness disproportionate to the effort level. Hands or legs trembling. Heart pounding in a way that feels disconnected from the physical work you are doing. These are not signs of pushing past a limit and finding growth on the other side. They are signs that blood sugar or blood pressure has dropped to a level that requires immediate response. Slow down, stop, sit, drink water with electrolytes, eat something. Nothing productive exists on the other side of ignoring these signals. There is only extended recovery time and the possibility of genuine harm. Over weeks and months of consistent, intelligent fasted training, the internal architecture of your muscles changes in ways that compound the benefits and reduce the difficulty at the same time. Mitochondria, the cellular structures that convert fuel into usable energy, multiply in response to the repeated signal of training in a fuel-limited environment. The enzymes responsible for fat oxidation become more numerous and more active. The transporters that physically carry fatty acids across cell membranes become more efficient. Your muscles, in a literal biological sense, get better at burning fat. The same pace or effort level that felt depleting and difficult during week 1 becomes manageable in week 3 and natural in week 8. A trained individual who has practiced fasted cardio consistently can show fat oxidation rates 20 to 30% higher than those of a person doing the same workout in a fed state. That adaptation was earned one session at a time through repetition and progressive exposure.
Insulin sensitivity improves alongside this. And this particular benefit may be the most underappreciated long-term outcome of consistent fasted training. Every session where your muscle cells have to work hard with low insulin present makes those cells more responsive to insulin later in the day when it does arrive with a meal. Glucose clears from the bloodstream faster. Blood sugar fluctuations after meals are smaller. The hormonal effort required to manage carbohydrate intake decreases. Over months and years, this reduces the long-term risk of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. It shifts the entire 24-hour metabolic picture in a favorable direction, not just the 1-hour window during the fasted workout.
What the directional evidence consistently points toward is that the combination of fasting and movement nudges your cells toward maintenance and efficiency in ways that a fed workout does not, and that this cellular upgrade over months and years may have implications for long-term health that extend well beyond body composition or athletic performance. For your brain specifically, the regular practice of fasted training creates adaptations that many experienced practitioners describe as among the most meaningful outcomes of the entire practice. With repeated exposure to mild, controlled glucose limitation, the brain becomes more efficient at utilizing ketones as an alternative fuel source. It becomes more tolerant of modest glucose fluctuations, less prone to the irritability, difficulty concentrating, and emotional reactivity that these fluctuations trigger in someone whose brain has only ever operated on a constant glucose drip. Focus during fasted sessions improves with training history. Post-workout cognitive clarity,
a sense of mental freshness and purposefulness that follows a morning fasted session and often persists well into the first several hours of the workday, deepens with consistent practice. The hunger signal itself changes character. What began as a demanding, distracting, hard-to-ignore urgency becomes, over weeks of practice, a quieter, more informational signal, mild, present, but no longer commanding.
Ghrelin, the hormone most associated with hunger, does more than just make you want food. It communicates with brain regions involved in motivation, memory consolidation, and reward processing. During fasting, ghrelin rises, and some research suggests that this rise, rather than simply creating misery, may actually sharpen learning capacity and enhance motivation in ways that a fully fed brain does not experience. The slight edge of need, the mild hunger that remains present during a well-executed fasted session, may be part of what gives the fasted brain its distinctive quality. Not comfortable exactly, but switched on, alert, engaged, as if the absence of an easy supply of fuel is sharpening the entire system, in the same way that mild, productive discomfort sharpens attention. Not everybody should be speaking this metabolic language in the same way, or at the same time, or at the same intensity. Imagine treating fasted training like a medication with real dose and timing requirements. The right dose for the right person at the right stage of their metabolic development can be genuinely transformative. The wrong dose, applied too aggressively, or to someone whose body is not equipped to handle it safely, causes harm without delivering the intended benefit.
For generally healthy adults with stable blood sugar, no history of eating disorders, and a reasonable existing fitness foundation, low to moderate intensity fasted training is very likely safe and effective when approached with patience and attention. If you can skip breakfast occasionally without your hands shaking, your thinking becoming muddled, or your emotions swinging sharply, you have at least baseline metabolic flexibility. Your liver can manage glucose output. Your fat cells can mobilize. Your hormones can calibrate. For this group, a 30 to 45-minute brisk walk or easy ride after a 12 to 16-hour overnight fast is an appropriate starting point, and the adaptations will build from there if the practice is consistent. For people with diabetes or blood sugar management conditions, medications that affect insulin or blood pressure, chronically low baseline blood pressure, pregnancy, breastfeeding, or any current or historical struggle with disordered eating, fasted exercise is not a self-directed experiment. The combination of low glucose, shifted hormones, and physical stress can push these bodies into physiological states that look like adaptation from the outside, but are in fact the opposite. Medical and in some cases mental health guidance is not a bureaucratic formality in these situations. It is a genuine safety requirement.
There are also subtler warning signs that apply to otherwise healthy people who push fasted training too hard, too soon, or without adequate recovery. Recurring dizziness across multiple sessions that does not improve with reduced intensity. Performance declining week over week rather than gradually improving. Sleep quality deteriorating rather than improving with the addition of fasted training. A growing preoccupation with extending fasts, tracking minutes, or feeling that eating must be earned through exercise. These last signals in particular deserve honest attention because they mark the line where metabolic flexibility practices begin sliding into disordered patterns. One of those outcomes builds genuine physiological resilience. The other quietly dismantles health while looking from the outside like discipline. The practical starting point is simpler than the biology might suggest. Choose 1 or 2 mornings per week where you allow at least 12 hours to pass after your last meal before training. Drink water before and during the session. Add sodium, potassium, and magnesium to your water if the session will exceed 30 minutes, as electrolytes help maintain blood pressure and muscle function when glucose is not present to support cellular hydration. Begin with low to moderate intensity. A brisk walk, an easy jog, a light cycling session, or a moderate load strength workout focused on compound movements. Keep the session to 45 to 60 minutes. Then break your fast within 1 to 2 hours with a real meal. Not a protein bar, but a complete meal with substantial protein and adequate carbohydrates. Pay close attention to how your body responds, not just during the session, but for the 3 to 4 hours that follow.
Energy quality, mood, focus, hunger intensity, and workout performance over subsequent weeks all carry important information. If those metrics trend positively over 4 to 6 weeks, the protocol is working and can be gradually expanded. If recurring dizziness, persistent performance decline, worsening sleep, or disordered thoughts around food and eating emerge, pull back, reduce intensity, shorten the fasting window, or return to fed training for a period before reintroducing the fasted practice more gradually. The goal is a more flexible, more capable, more resilient metabolism, not a demonstration of willpower, not an identity built around restriction. A practical, sustainable metabolic skill that makes your energy less dependent on the clock and more responsive to what your body actually needs. Somewhere around the 4 to 6 week mark of consistent practice, something quiet and important shifts. The alarm cuts through the dark at 6 a.m. Your stomach feels hollow. And instead of the familiar uncertainty about whether this is a terrible idea, there is simply readiness. Your liver is already working. Your fat cells are already primed. Your hormones are already calibrating. Your brain is about to make the move from rest to performance. And your body, having rehearsed this particular metabolic piece enough times to stop thinking about it, simply begins.
That is the real gift of fasted training, and it has nothing to do with any single session. It is a progressive expansion of your operating range, an increase in your body's capacity to perform, think, and function without the constant presence of external fuel. It is metabolic fluency. Your cells becoming proficient in a language they had not practiced in years, a language of stored fat and liver glycogen, and quiet ketone production, a language that made your ancestors capable of extraordinary physical performance on nothing more than what their own bodies had stored. Every time you complete a fasted session successfully, every time the liver manages glucose delivery, and the fat cells mobilize, and the hormones calibrate, and the muscles perform without the support of breakfast, you demonstrate something important to yourself, that your body is more capable than your habits have been giving it credit for, that the relationship between your energy and your meal schedule is less rigid than you thought, that the hollow feeling in your stomach at 6 a.m. is not a weakness signal. It is a readiness signal. And the question your body is waiting for you to answer is not whether to eat or not to eat. It is which metabolic performance you want to rehearse today, and whether you are ready to trust your own biology to deliver it.
The metabolic transformation that builds over consistent fasted training also begins to change something that is rarely measured, but is perhaps the most practically valuable outcome of the entire practice: your relationship with hunger itself. Most people who have grown up in an environment of constant food availability have never truly learned to distinguish genuine physiological hunger from habit-based eating. Hunger to them is a clock signal. It is noon, therefore they are hungry. It is movie time, therefore they need popcorn. It is a stressful afternoon, therefore they need something from the kitchen. These patterns are real and they are deeply ingrained, but they have almost nothing to do with what the body actually needs at those moments.
Fasted training disrupts those patterns in a way that nothing else does quite as effectively. When you have completed a 40-minute brisk walk on an empty stomach, experienced the initial hunger fade during the warm-up, moved through a focused session with sustained energy, and then arrived at the end of that session feeling tired but not desperate, you have learned something irreplaceable through direct experience. You do not fall apart without food. Your body has reserves. Your performance does not instantly collapse the moment your stomach is empty. That knowledge, not as a concept, but as a lived physical experience, changes how you respond to hunger for the rest of the day and eventually for the rest of your life.
Hunger becomes informational rather than commanding. You learn to ask, is this actual physiological hunger, the kind that comes from genuine fuel depletion? Or is it habit, boredom, stress, or routine? The ability to make that distinction accurately, in real time, without anxiety or guilt, is a form of metabolic and psychological literacy that consistent fasted training develops in a way that no amount of meal planning or nutritional reading alone can replicate.
The inflammation picture adds another dimension that often goes unappreciated. Chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that simmers below the threshold of obvious symptoms, but contributes over decades to cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, joint deterioration, and neurodegenerative conditions, has multiple contributing roots. Excess body fat, particularly visceral fat stored around the organs, releases inflammatory signaling molecules continuously. Poor insulin sensitivity, which creates chronic insulin elevation, drives inflammatory pathways. Mitochondrial inefficiency creates oxidative stress that damages cellular structures and triggers repair responses that become pathological when they are chronic. Fasted training addresses all three of these roots simultaneously. It reduces visceral fat through enhanced fat mobilization. It improves insulin sensitivity through repeated low-insulin exercise exposure. It improves mitochondrial efficiency through the adaptations that accumulate over weeks of practice. None of this is a cure for any disease. None of it replaces medication, medical supervision, or the foundational lifestyle factors of sleep, nutrition quality, and stress management. But as one component of a thoughtful approach to long-term health, the anti-inflammatory effects of well-practiced fasted training are real and worth understanding.
The evolutionary perspective is not just philosophical window dressing. It is actually instructive for understanding how your body is calibrated and what it was optimized for. Homo sapiens spent the vast majority of their evolutionary history in environments where food was intermittently available. Feast and famine was not a dietary choice. It was the reality of survival. The bodies that thrived in those environments were the ones that could maintain physical and cognitive performance during periods of food scarcity, mobilize stored energy efficiently, protect lean tissue under metabolic stress, and rapidly capitalize on food when it became available by storing energy efficiently. Those are precisely the physiological adaptations that consistent fasted training develops. Your body is not being asked to do something foreign or unnatural. It is being reminded of something it was built for and has been largely prevented from practicing by modern eating habits.
That framing matters because it changes how you relate to the discomfort that fasted training sometimes produces. Early morning emptiness is not your body failing. It is your body activating a different and, in some ways, more sophisticated operating mode, one that most modern bodies have rarely been given the chance to use. The mild shakiness or irritability that some beginners experience in the first few fasted sessions is not evidence that fasted training is wrong for them. It is evidence that their metabolic flexibility is currently limited and needs to be developed. In the same way that cardiovascular fitness is limited in someone who has never trained aerobically and needs to be developed through consistent progressive exposure. The discomfort is the beginning of the adaptation, not evidence that the adaptation is impossible. And that is ultimately the complete picture of fasted training. It is not a fat-burning hack. It is not a biohack or a shortcut or a trick. It is a metabolic skill built through consistent, patient, intelligent practice that expands what your body is capable of. It develops your liver's glucose management capacity. It develops your fat cells' responsiveness to mobilization signals. It develops your mitochondria's fat oxidation efficiency. It develops your hormonal balance and sensitivity. It develops your brain's ability to operate with focus and clarity across a wider range of fuel conditions. And it develops your own self-knowledge, your ability to read your body's signals accurately and respond to them intelligently rather than reactively. The alarm will go off again tomorrow morning. The stomach will be hollow. The choice will be there. And now you understand exactly what is happening on both sides of it.
What makes the difference between someone who gets the benefits and someone who gets the burnout
is not genetics, not willpower, not superior discipline. It is information and self-honesty. The person who thrives with fasted training is the one who started small, paid attention to what their body actually reported, rather than what they hoped it would report, adjusted when the signals warranted adjustment, and built their fasting practice the same way they would build any other fitness capacity, progressively, patiently, and with respect for the recovery process. The person who struggles is typically the one who heard that fasted training burns more fat, immediately jumped to hour-long high-intensity sessions on a 16-hour fast, pushed through fatigue and dizziness because they believed suffering was part of the process, and then concluded after 3 weeks of declining performance and chronic exhaustion that fasted training does not work for them. What did not work was the approach, not the biology. The biology works when it is given the right conditions. Those conditions require starting conservatively, building progressively, prioritizing post-workout nutrition, ensuring total protein and calorie intake is adequate across the full day, protecting sleep quality, and being willing to recognize the difference between productive challenge and counterproductive strain.
The internal experience of a well-executed fasted workout, one that stays within the individual's current adaptation level and follows the recovery protocols, is one of the more quietly remarkable physical experiences available without any equipment or substances. You are moving your body through a performance fueled entirely by what your own cells stored. Your liver is conducting a complex fuel management operation in real time. Your fat cells are contributing energy they were holding for exactly this kind of demand. Your muscles are demonstrating capability that exists independent of your last meal. Your brain is operating on a combination of managed glucose and early ketone production that, for people who have adapted, produces a mental state that many describe as cleaner and more focused than anything they experience during fed workouts. That experience and the metabolic capacity that makes it possible is available to you, not through intensity, not through suffering, through consistency, intelligence, patience, and the willingness to let your body teach you what it is actually capable of when it is given the conditions to demonstrate it. The morning is quiet. The stomach is hollow. The choice is yours.
So, start there. Tomorrow morning, or the morning after that, let at least 12 hours pass after dinner. Drink a full glass of water with a pinch of salt and a squeeze of lemon to support electrolyte balance. Step outside or into the gym and do something manageable. A brisk 25 to 30-minute walk, an easy cycle, a gentle jog. Notice how your body actually feels, not how you expected it to feel. Notice when the hunger signal fades, when the mental focus sharpens, when the movement starts to feel natural. Keep the effort level conversational. End before you feel depleted. Then eat a real meal within the next hour or two, with protein as the anchor. And repeat that experiment 2 mornings the following week. After 4 weeks, you will have more real data about how your specific body responds to fasted training than any article, podcast, or fitness influencer can give you. You will know your own glycogen storage capacity, your own cortisol tolerance, your own clarity window, your own hunger patterns. You will have begun building the mitochondrial and enzymatic adaptations that make fat burning more efficient. You have practiced the insulin sensitivity improvements that change how your body handles carbohydrates for the rest of the day. And you will have demonstrated to yourself, not just conceptually, but physically, that your energy reserves and your performance capacity are larger than your breakfast schedule. That is what fasted training actually offers. Not a shortcut, not a magic metabolic switch, a skill, a capacity, a broader, more flexible, more resilient metabolic range, built one honest, patient, progressive session at a time.
The alarm goes off. The stomach is hollow. The body is ready. The only question left is whether you are ready to trust it.